Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah, amma ba'd. Welcome all. This is the first and hopefully not last discussion of the Crusades Through Arab Eyes by the author Amin Maalouf. So a quick intro. Amin Maalouf is a Lebanese French. He's, I think, living right now in France. He's a Christian Maronite. He has some bibliography regarding, he's written some novels, and he also writes, in cultural things and cultural aspects and that kind of stuff. This book is one of his productions. It's called the Crusades Through Arab Eyes. What drew the group's attention, Middle Nations' attention to that book, is that it is one of the few books that does tell the story of the quote-unquote Crusades uh, through Arab sources exclusively. It does not include any Latin sources in its narrative, which makes it valuable for us in the Muslim world, because it tells us as Muslims and tells the rest of the world the story through our own eyes, and the unspeakable horrors and all of that through our own eyes. And we always attach, trust to our narrative, to our historians and to our narrators, because they are naturally Muslims. So we hold that to be very, very reliable indeed. So the Crusades, right? Where to start? So the Crusades let us start with two single quotes just to understand what we're dealing with here. The first quote is by the Roman historian Tacitus. It says, "You Romans create a desert and call it peace." And the second quote is by the man who died, I think, this year or the year before, Henry Kissinger, when in the aftermath of the 1973 war, the Arab foreign ministers asked him, after they had achieved victory, why did it seem right now, in the eve of the war, that the UN was willing to implement resolutions 242 and all of that? He said, simply because before Israel had the military supremacy, and there was no reason for the US or for Israel or for anyone to implement 242. In other words, we didn't have to do it. We implemented peace in our own way, and it was successful until you guys rose up. So why am I saying this? Because it's important to understand that when the West says something and do something different than what they say, it's not a contradiction on their side. They're doing exactly what they mean. It's just that what they mean and their actions, what their actions mean, is that when they say peace, for example, they mean subjugation, they mean domination, they mean that it's not a zero-sum game where all parties involved will benefit. No, they mean that we will exclusively benefit, and you will only benefit in so much as it will help your own subjugation. If you will benefit even slightly like us or equal to our own benefit, then that doesn't work. This is a loss on our side. Okay, so because we will continuously read that the causes of the Crusades were noble, but however, when they came to the East, they did this and that and the other. And we would say, wow, how could they say that and then do that? And it's no contradiction on their side. They're doing exactly what they mean, but what they're saying and what their actions imply always mean different things, because their psyche is different than our own psyche. We apply our own moral understanding of their words, and they apply their own moral understanding of their words. So this is important for us to understand moving forward, inshallah. Of course, as I mentioned, the Crusades by Amin Maalouf relies heavily on the Arab sources, or exclusively on the Arab sources. So it does not give a reason for the start of the Crusades. Okay, so in order just to put some context into this discussion, we have to understand what was happening in Europe at the end of the 11th century. So at the end of the 11th century, there was political chaos in Europe, to say the least. Kingdoms were weak; they were not very strong kingdoms, and the feudal system made the nobles very, very, very powerful, and they always had this tendency to just be independent of their own kingdoms, and they always had military conflicts between them and their own kings. Many of the times they were in direct conflict, and they were so powerful that they were able to challenge those kings and become kings themselves sometimes. Okay. The second thing is that the power of the church was very, very much on the rise, and the Pope was able to make up armies and to consolidate their powers by making those armies, in order to make those armies go into holy war. This is the first time the popes were able to mobilize armies under the pretense of the holy war, something that was, I think, the foundation for had been laid down by someone called Augustine of Hippo or something like that, which is, again, because you have to understand that in the Christian scripture, you see always peace and turn the other cheek and all of that. But for the first time, we're now seeing that holy war is justified and it can be waged even by the Pope in Rome. The power grab between the church and the kingdoms in Europe was very intense, and in many times the armies of the church would, wage wars against those kings of Europe to ensure that the church was free and it was independent of their of the king's reach. And the church, as we should see, was even able to mobilize the armies and to signal to mobilize armies to the east, starting the Crusades. And this was a strong signal to those kings of Europe that not only are we able to challenge you here in Europe, but we are also able to mobilize armies to the east, meaning that you cannot simply make us disappear or make the power of the church disappear anymore. We're just more powerful than that. And it also so happens, as we shall see in the book, inshallah, that the Eastern Romans, aka the Byzantines in the east, they after the famous Battle of Massincart, they started appealing to the church in Rome that please help us, we need your help against the Turks because they are invading Anatolia, or modern day Turkey, and we need your help. So of course the church in Rome and the Pope saw this as a golden opportunity to interfere and to send armies to the east. Also, we have to take into consideration that the European society at the time was very, very strictly hierarchical, and only the eldest son would inherit their father's estate, meaning that the other brothers of this son, the other children of this nobleman who had just died, were knights and they were nobles, but they had no land and they had no wealth, meaning that they would have to carve out their own, and you have to look at that, they had to carve out their own estates elsewhere. And this usually came through pillaging and through stealing other people's lands, because where else could they get lands? And you also have to understand that Europe's resources back then and until now are meager. They don't have resources there, and so they have to, whatever meager resources that they have to fight over, right? So when the call for the Crusades came, those knights found a golden opportunity, and the church found a golden opportunity to change those knights, those thieves, those people who are pillaging and raping. Overnight, they became knights of the church, knights of Jesus, and of course he's he didn't tell them any of that. So they became the defenders of Christianity overnight. Those thieves became the defenders of Christianity overnight, without having to break the church's peace or the God's peace. And at the same time, there is a way for them to rape and pillage and do all of what they do and steal, but in the east, in the Far East. So Europe would be safe. And this, of course, meant that there would be less conflict in Europe, because now all of the military power was in the east, and they were carving out kingdoms and counties there. Also, we have to take into consideration the Italian republics, like Venice, Genoa, Pisa, and these were merchant republics. They saw in the east huge wealth, and they thought that, again, greed, please underline this word, greed. They saw that their trade was not enough anymore. They wanted more. And so when they saw the call for the Crusades, they thought, okay, we can help those Crusaders, and we will have more privileges in the newly established kingdoms and counties in the east. We will have less taxation, more help in setting up our marketplaces and our motels and so on and so forth. And so we find them using their merchant fleets, helping the soldiers, transferring weapons, and helping the Crusades in general, establishing their kingdoms in the east. Also, there were the miserable peasants who were they were suffering under the constant turmoil because of the rape and pillage that has been happening in Europe. So when the call for the Crusades came, they found some respite, because they thought, okay, this is not working here. So at least if it's going to be, if it's not going to be better there, it's not going to be worse than here. So they had this chance to join the armies of the Crusaders and to go to the east. And finally, the religious aspect is that when Pope Urban II was preaching for the first crusade in Clermont, he called it a pilgrimage, and this is the conflict or the seeming contradiction that we see. Those pilgrims who were going to save, quote unquote, Jerusalem, they were armed and they killed many innocent people, Muslims, Christians, and Jews on their so-called pilgrimage. And however, they were convinced that this was a pilgrim. This is the psyche that we're dealing with. And there was also this end of time feeling that was, taking over Europe at the time, because at this time it was 1,000 years since the birth and the seeming death of Isa alayhi salam. We know as Muslims that he was rufi'a ila Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised him to the skies. So it had been 1,000 years since the absence of Jesus alayhi salam, and so a millennia was like haunting the minds of the Europeans, like, this is the end of time, we have to do something. And so this was the religious aspect. Our beloved speakers, do you have any comments on what has just been said?
I have lots of comments, but I will leave, inshallah, finish up and then we can discuss it. Or if you want, I think,
yeah, please go ahead.
Interesting, subhanAllah, but there was also, I was watching, this historical Neil deGrasse Tyson, Casagranda. I think he did a good job regarding the Crusades, especially this background that you were speaking about, because it's very interesting. 1,000 years you do nothing, and suddenly you decide, to do this. It's kind of, subhanAllah, interesting. Very interesting player. He gives some idea about the players that were involved in the background of it. But subhanallah, even the Vikings, who were Germans by their nature, and he says that exactly they were in the Scandinavian, and they didn't the population started to grow, and they didn't have the resources, right? So what they decided was, we need to probably do some trade, right? So this was their first. That's in the 50 years prior or 100 years prior to the first crusade, where they started to go to the Blad Shem for trade and so on. So already they were interacting with that region, it's not, and we already know from from the Sirah and what happened with later on with the Sahaba, that there was already contact between the Rum and the Muslim world. It wasn't just separate and suddenly they decided to come, but there already were some historical tensions between the parties, right? So they started coming, they started trading and so on, and of course already from these first instances, they were just pillaging and destroying everything along the way. And as you mentioned, subhanAllah, this Peter Hermit, he stands up right after this Pope speech that we need to go and, save Jerusalem and whatever. And the first crusade was really, as you mentioned, just mobs. It was really thugs and peasants. It was called even the Peasant Crusade or something. That's before the first official crusade. But it's crazy. We see it as some knights and, these nobles and so on. But it was just really a bunch of crazy Europeans, going on a pillage trip, right? It's subhanAllah, really people need to see it in a context of thugs going out on an expedition, right? Or something, just loot whatever you can along the way. So yeah, it's just that for me, it was very interesting to see the Vikings played a role in that, right? And they even, very interesting, the European experience for the Vikings, because then they took the northern France and so on, right? And France later on took Rome as part of it. And that's why the French, the Franks have a part in the Crusades, right? It's not like Romans going or something, but it was the French. So yeah, very interesting background, and I think you put it very beautifully, mashallah. You're doing such a great job. So please continue, Hafid.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam, Ustad.
Am I audible?
Very clearly.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. First, Brother Omar, I just wanted to thank you for hosting. You're absolutely the right man for the job on this. You're doing a fantastic job. And your knowledge of the history and the context is second to none, mashallah. What you said in your introduction, I think, is very important with regards to a number of aspects of it. I think, first of all, I would say with any book that we choose in the Middle Nation discussion, first, I read this book many, many years ago. It's decades ago now, actually. It probably around the time when it first came out. So it's good. It's good for me to actually reread it because it's been so long since I read it. There's so many. How can I say this? I mean, this is all part of our trying to establish our own epistemological sovereignty as Muslims, as an ummah. that we have to learn. It's a shame actually that we even have to learn it and don't already know it, but learn our own framework for events like this, for historical incidents like this, and historical context like this, and things that happened to us. We have largely only learned about it from their perspective. Even as you said, so-called crusades. We use this term crusades. That's their word. That's their word for what they were doing. That's their word for what they were, the crusaders. But that's not how the Muslims understood them. That's not the word that we used about them. They were French. They were the Frankish. It was a Frankish invasion. It was an occupation. That was the way that we understood it because that's what it was. But we still even talk about it in their language, and we understand it according to their terms. So we have several books. For anyone who doesn't know, we have a book discussion group on Telegram, and we have an ongoing discussion about the Sira. We have spaces on the Sira weekly or every couple of weeks. And we've gone through a number of other books. We have a book recommendation list on the Telegram channel of books that by no means is it a comprehensive list, but they're books that are helpful to building the intellectual foundation that you need, in my opinion, for sort of dealing with the world, dealing with the West, and having your own intellectual sovereignty for how you approach the world and so forth. So this book is no exception, obviously. With any book that we choose for the Middle Nation book discussion group, I think the point isn't just to read it. The point is to learn, or to help build, as I say, our epistemological sovereignty, to help us with our own psychological decolonization. And as I say, to make us effective or more effective and more useful in how we engage with issues in the current day. It's to try to increase our overall understanding about ourselves and about our ummah and about the West, and about the relationship between us and the West, and how that operates. For us, this book discussion group isn't just a sort of a pastime, as many book clubs or book discussion groups might be, just a sort of a pastime or a hobby. It's not a pastime for us. It's training. This is training for us. It's intellectual training. And I think that one of the most important things for us to be able to understand with regards to the world generally, but also the way that we look at this book, the Crusades Through Arab Eyes, is to understand realpolitik, which is something that we talk about a lot on the channel. Realpolitik, in other words, basically the way things actually work in the world, so that you can navigate the world more effectively, more realistically, while, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, keeping your morals intact. So for most of us, as I say, when we talk about crusades, the Frankish invasions of the Muslim world, we talk about it like a fable. It's a fable to most of us. You know, Salah ad-Din is like a Marvel superhero. Most of us don't really have that much information about what actually took place. But I think it's extremely useful for us to understand what really happened, how the Muslims dealt with what was really going on at that time, how the leaders dealt with it, you know, because if we understand the reality of how these events actually played out in the real world, it can give us, I think, a better appreciation of how things play out in our own lifetimes and the situations that we're facing. You know, Palestine was occupied 1,000 years ago by Westerners, and it's occupied now by Westerners. You know, they did it in the name of religion, so-called then, and they're doing the same now, so-called. So we're looking at a continuum. We're looking at a living continuum of conflict that stretches between us and the West, that stretches from the time of Rasulullah ﷺ and the Battle of Mu'tah, through the Crusades, through colonization, through colonialism, through neo-colonialism, obviously through Zionism, so-called globalization. This is all a continuum. The so-called Crusades, because like I say, that's I almost hate to use the term, but I mean it is the term that's used in the book. And again, the book is written in English, so it's sort of for a Western audience. But it's basically their own PR term for themselves, crusades or crusaders. But the Frankish invasion, the occupiers, they embody the Western or the West's, what you can say, their recurring posture towards the Muslim world. It's a consistent recurring posture: invasion, exploitation, aggression, you know, wrapped always in the rhetoric of principle. We see it time and time and time again. So when you read this book, you'll see very clearly what I've said many, many times on the channel. They have never changed. They have never changed. This is one of the reasons why I think it's crucial for us to read history, to read our own history, especially from our own sources. Because like I've also talked about on the channel, history isn't the past. History is a continuum. We're living in history now, you know, and they have been consistently aggressive, consistently materialistically driven, and they have consistently cloaked their actions in moralistic or ideological rhetoric, ideological language. And as Brother Omar said at the beginning, I think that we consistently make a mistake where we say that there's a contradiction between what they say and what they do. But the contradiction is because we are interpreting their rhetoric according to our own value system, according to our own cultural, ideological, belief-based dictionary. They have a different dictionary. Their words mean different things to them than those same words mean to us. So like he said, when they say, like he began with a quote about you make a desert and you call it peace. Okay, that's what they really mean. They're not lying. When they say, for example, we're going to liberate Iraq. For them, liberate, when you're talking about other people, liberate means subjugate. They have different definitions. They work on a completely different cultural dictionary than we do. And they're just the same now as they were then at the time of the Crusades. And you'll see that when you read the book. This book could almost have been, if you just change some of the names of the actors, some of the names of the characters, this book could have been written yesterday about what's going on right now. So I think it's important that we approach history from within our own framework and with clear eyes, because our rulers and our commanders, let's be honest, our own rulers and our commanders at the time of the Crusades, they weren't angels. These weren't malaika. Yes, they were believers, they were mu'mineen, but they were also practical, realistic men. And they were often ruthless, and they were cunning, and they were politically calculating, because they had to be. Realpolitik it was as central to their decision-making as Iman was. This is the difference between the moral framing of events that we often do, where we turn history into a fable, you know, truth versus falsehood, Iman versus kufr, and so on. This is the difference between that and the sort of lived reality of actually navigating power and power dynamics and power relationships. To achieve victory, the leaders of the Muslim world at that time and today, the leaders who were on the side of the truth, sometimes had to engage in what we would consider very unsavory behavior and unsavory actions, but they were pragmatic actions and they were necessary actions. I mean, you'll see, for example, again, this is something that we talked about on the discussion group some time ago. When people are very hostile towards our current Muslim governments, and they say, like, they're doing nothing on Palestine, they should have been able to end the occupation by now. But look, for most of the history of the Frankish invasion, the occupation of the Franj in Palestine, the Muslims didn't take that matter seriously enough, according to our current moral standards, our own modern standards. They failed. They capitulated. They were inactive, and they were blameworthy. If you go by the standards that you all are imposing today, even more than what you've seen over the course of the Zionist occupation, in terms of what we would regard as inaction. The Muslim leaders at the time of the Crusades were even more inactive than what you would accuse the Muslim world of being during the Zionist occupation. I mean, if you go by the standards of most people today, especially online and social media, most of the people who condemn the Arab world or the Muslim world for inaction, compared to most of the period of the Crusades, of the Frankish occupation, the Muslim world and the Arab world today has been immeasurably better. They have been immeasurably more proactive. And you'll see that, in fact, you're applying a very ignorant metric to judge both the Muslims in the past and the Muslims now. You have to understand what was really going on at that time in order for you to understand a proper perspective on the way things are happening now, the way things are transpiring now. Because if you regard them as failures, or you regard them as cowards, or you regard them as passive, you have completely misunderstood what the Muslims back then were dealing with and the Muslims today are dealing with. You haven't wrapped your head around realpolitik. You understand? Because listen, during the height of the Crusades, during the height of the Frankish occupation, roughly for every one European occupier there were at least 20 to 30 Muslims. They were vastly outnumbered in Palestine. The Franj were vastly outnumbered. And the Muslim empire at that time was the biggest and the strongest and the most advanced, the most educated, the most sophisticated in the world. Yet it took them around 200 years to dislodge this comparatively tiny occupation force. Why? Because it's not straightforward. It's a not straightforward set of circumstances. It's very complex. It's very complicated. And if you compare that to the Zionist occupation, which again, we have a complete reversal of status with regards to, if you look at the Crusader occupation versus the Zionist occupation, it's a complete reversal of the power dynamics, because the Israel has been backed by and is backed by the biggest and the strongest and the most advanced and the most sophisticated empire in the world today, has been, while the Muslim world is now comparatively weak. Because the Muslim world has suffered colonization, exploitation, fragmentation for the last 100 years or more. So the power dynamics are.
I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah. I was wondering if it happened on
Alright,
my side.
okay.
SubhanAllah.
Ustad,
Shahid,
if you hear us, please know that we cannot hear you.
I will disconnect Ustaz, inshallah, and we'll try to reconnect him. So if you want to take over, Brother Omar, please do.
Yes, sure.
The Ummah and insulting our people and insulting.
Okay. Let's just give him a minute if he is able to rejoin. Okay, so until our Ustad is able to rejoin, we're just going to give context to what actually Ustad is saying, or was saying, regarding the fragmentation of the Muslim world and the numerical superiority of the Muslim world as opposed to the numerical inferiority of the invaders, of the French. And I believe there were many points that Ustad mentioned that we have to take to heart. The first of which is that we should, if we are going to apply epistemological decolonization, then we have to start calling those invaders by their true name, which is incidentally the name that was the name that they were referred to by the Muslim historians, which is the French. If you are a history enthusiast and you start reading the Ummahat al-Kutub, the original sources of the time period, the writers of the time period, you will notice that never, very I don't think that any Muslim historian called those invaders crusaders. They always refer to them as Faranj, Ifranj, Firanji, that kind of thing, and interchangeably they would call them the Christians or the Rooms or anything like that. So there was no religious reference except in the Christians reference. However, they would always call them the Franj or the Ifranj or the invaders or anything like that, which gives you a sense of how the Muslim historians were aware of the true of the true motives behind those people. They knew that they weren't coming to quote unquote save Jerusalem or anything like that. They were coming to just take land and steal resources. And Ustad is back. Sir, are you able to speak right now?
Assalamu alaikum. I don't know what happened. I seem to have gotten kicked out. I don't know at what point I got cut off. But I think I probably
got cut off. And you were talking about the superiority and the complexity of the situation, and that the Arabs were currently the Muslim states are in a weaker position than they were even back then during the Crusades.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, it's basically a reversal of the power dynamics, as was in the case in the Crusades. But in the time of the Crusades, like I said, it took them 200 years to navigate that situation and coordinate a way to get out of that situation and achieve victory. Whereas now we are in a much less advantageous position. But alhamdulillah, we're nearing the end of the Zionist occupation of Palestine, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. And yet people still accuse our leaders and our governments of being inactive or being complicit or being passive and so on and so on. This is all because you don't understand geopolitics and you don't understand realpolitik. And so I hope that inshallah, bi'idhnillah, by reading this book and looking at what the leaders were grappling with in those times, it might give you a better appreciation of what the leaders are grappling with in these times. And I guess that will be the end of it, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khairan, Ustadna. Thank you so much for this brilliant intro. And please, listeners and speakers, take this to heart, because this is going to be, inshallah, the frame of reference that we are going to get back to often when we are talking and speaking about the we have to the crusades, or this conflict, let's call it, throughout, inshallah, our discussion of the book. Okay, so just to give another intro, or just to give a bit further of a context to this discussion, we also need to understand. So we understood right now the context in Europe, which was, as we mentioned, there was a political context, there was a religious context, there was a social context, and of course, there was an economic context. You can never ever disregard the economic context from this conflict, or from any conflict that the West is engaged in. Just to let's let that sink in, and let pin this point in your mind. Okay, so the context in the Arab world, or in let's call it in the Muslim world. That's more accurate, because Muslims are Arabs and other ethnicities as well. Okay, so in the context in the Muslim world was as follows. If you guys if both our listeners and our speakers have read the book, you will see that it starts with Qadi Abu Sa'd al-Harawi, the Damascene judge who went to Al-Khalifa al-Abbasi in Baghdad, Khalifa al-Mustadar, and he was complaining and submitting his formal complaint about what had happened in Jerusalem, and we will get into this, inshallah, and telling him that how can they be sitting in the palace in Baghdad while their Muslim brethren are being tortured and have been savaged and massacred in Bilad al-Sham. But this is exactly what was wrong with this situation. The Khalifa in Baghdad was no longer the supreme Muslim leader of the Muslim world. And again, brothers and sisters, take this to heart. So 200 years ago, 200 years had passed since the golden age of the Muslim of the Khalifa of Baghdad, where he was the supreme leader of the Muslim world. In those 200 years, a lot of things had happened. Not to get into them, but during the end of this period, a great sultanate had risen in Central Asia, which is called the Great Seljuk Sultanate. This was a sultanate that had the most land since the days of the Abbasids. And those Seljuks were Sunni Muslim Turkish leaders. They had established a vast empire stretching all the way from the borders of China to the Bilad al-Sham and the Levant, and they even tried to enter Egypt, but they couldn't. However, after the famous Battle of Mazinkart in 1071, they were able to invade Anatolia and establish a presence there, right? But at the end of the third monarch's reign, which is Malik Shah, he was the last leader of the great Seljuks, al-Salajikatul Idam, right? After that, a savage disintegration afflicted this great sultanate, and we start hearing about the Seljuks of Asia, the Seljuks of Iraq, the Seljuks of Bilad al-Sham, and the Seljuks of Bilad al-Rum, or the Roman Seljuks who were living in Anatolia. And not only were they disintegrated in that these were, firmly established houses in each of those regions. No, even in Bilad al-Sham, there was disintegration. Even in Iraq, there was disintegration. And in Asia, maybe the house that remained intact was the Seljuks of Rome. And that is going to be apparent in how they dealt with the first and the first wave and the second wave of the French who were coming to Bilad al-Sham to invade. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that the Khalifa in Baghdad was powerless, and even his patrons, the Seljuks, were not as united as they should have been in order to pay attention to the coming threat from the West. That's why when Qadi Abu Sa'd al-Harawi was going to complain to the Khalifa, his complaint fell on deaf ears, because what could the Khalifa do? All he could do was, issue a formal investigation and inquiry into what had happened and blah, blah, blah. But the point I'm trying to make is Qadi Abu Sa'd should have known better, that he would have should have gone to the people who hold more power than the Khalifa, maybe the Seljuks or something like that, because they were the ones who were able to take a stand if they wanted to take a stand against the French. So it's important to know that the Abbasid Khalifa was weak. There was a Seljuk Sultanate in different regions of the Muslim world, and there was also Egypt was kind of, what can you say? It was kind of isolated from this whole thing because it was under the Fatimid Khilafah, the Al-Khulafa al-Musliyin, the Egyptian caliphs in Cairo. They were not interested in this power struggle. They only were interested in keeping their possessions in Bilad al-Sham. And it's interesting to know that Jerusalem was actually under Fatimid rule right before the invasion of the Franks. Brother Kareem, please go ahead.
Yeah, subhanallah, but like regarding the Fatimids, we know their aqidah a bit, but I think they really had some problems with seeing, the Sunnis have the power that they had at the time. So Allah knows if they had no interest, like from what I read from different sources, Allahu A'lam, I'm not sure how, reliable. But I do think that they, like they kind of supported more the Western factions, to somehow fight the Sunni, right? That's from my understanding. I don't know if you had read about that. Like, if you can maybe expand on that, because I do not think that they were completely, like, they didn't care. I do think that they wanted to be, part of it. And when they saw someone fighting against Sunnis, they were like, yeah, yallah, let's support. But then they saw that, backstabbers, right? Like, as Ustaz just wrote in the group, don't give them your back, right? That's something that, subhanAllah, already that experience shows you, right? So as you said, they did have Jerusalem, and they thought that, okay, here the line will be drawn, as we decided, and the Crusaders just kept on moving forward, and the Fatimids are like, what are you doing? Didn't we decide, and so on, and subhanAllah, then, yeah, what continues, right?
Absolutely. It's just, again, as the Ustad said, realpolitik is the order of the day, okay? So yes, and sometimes the Fatimids were happy to see that the French were coming to the Bilad al-Sham because they wanted to see a buffer between them and the Seljuks, right? However, the Fatimids were in Egypt for 200 years, and many, sorry, not many, one of their famous viziers, I think he was called Saleh, I don't remember the name, to be honest, right now. However, he was he was a Sunni vizier, and he fought the French in Bilad al-Sham. So it was not always that the Fatimids wanted to fight the Sunnis and that kind of thing. It was always a power grab. It was always a power struggle. And realpolitik is in that kind of situation, realpolitik is more dominant than aqidah, at least to my own understanding. Maybe Ustad can expand on that a little, but as I see it, because at the end of the Fatimid era as well, it was by Fatimid requests that appeals were sent both to Nur ad-Din al-Zingi and to the Crusaders. So Aqidah played no part in this situation. It was just hoping for the stronger person to come and save us, whoever that stronger person might be, whether it's a Sunni, it's a Firangi, or whatever you want. So just like today, you don't for a second believe that anyone is acting based on Aqidah purely. It's of course, it could be part of the decision-making process, but realpolitik is always present, and it will always be a huge decision-making factor, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there's another thing that we have to bear in mind, and this is a consistent thing really across history, in whether you're talking about the Crusades or any other sort of foreign occupation. The power structure in the land that's being occupied or that's being invaded generally views the outsiders as exactly that. They're outsiders, and they sort of minimize the extent to which they consider them a threat, because they don't view them as a permanent feature in their land. They know that they're here for some period of time and they will inevitably leave. That's the same way that, for example, the Taliban viewed the American occupation of Afghanistan. They knew eventually you will leave because this is not your land. This is, to one degree or another, it is a sensible view, but it also tends to make you underestimate the threat that is posed by these foreign elements. So there's all sorts of politicking that can go on, because, for example, in the first part, we were talking about Kilij Arslan and his rivalries with other leaders in the lands. And his main concern, or his main focus, was on his rivalries with the people who were there, with his own people, with his own local rivalries. That was his main focus. And they didn't really see these, strange Europeans coming into their land as something to be taken particularly seriously, because you can't be serious. You don't belong here. This isn't your place. Obviously, you'll come for a period of time, but eventually, inevitably, you will have to leave. And so their main concern was consolidating their power vis-a-vis their rivals, their local rivals. And as I say, there's some, to one degree or another, that is sensible, but it also underestimates the danger that's posed by those foreigners. And I think that's something that we have seen time and time and time again. I think that was also the case even with the in the early days of the Zionist infiltration of Palestine.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. I was just, and subhanAllah, you took it right out of my mouth, because I was having this same thought when I saw when I read about the Zionist occupation rising in 1948, and here in the Muslim world, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Muslim living in the Muslim world, and you read or watch even the media from the time period, you always hear the people in power in the Muslim world saying that these are just a bunch of Zionist gangs. We're going to go to them and destroy them. It's not going to take a week's effort or something like that. Meaning that they severely underestimated what they were facing in Palestine, and they thought that this was a movement that was by nature, that it was temporary, it was transient, that they were not of the land, and that they were going to deal with this swiftly and quickly, and it wouldn't take much time. And also there were some I think resemblances regarding the power structure and the relationships between the power structures in the Muslim lands back then and right now, because I also read that the kings of Egypt and the newly established kings of Jordan and Iraq and Syria and all of that, they weren't exactly unified in their visions. So they wanted, of course, to kick out the Zionists from Palestine, but also they wanted to limit the power zones or the power spheres of each other, which unfortunately helped, of course, the Zionist gangs in Palestine gain an upper hand in the power struggle later on. Okay, so I think we have now a fairly accurate context of the time period. Brother Kareem, your hand is raised. I'm not sure if that's a glitch or you actually want to say something.
Probably glitch. I think it might have stuck from the previous one. So sorry.
No problem at all. Okay, so now we're going to briefly explain or narrate what happened in the first wave. So as we have, if you have read the book, you will remember that the first wave was that Peter the Hermit assembled the people from the rabble from Europe. There were few knights and few soldiers that were with this army. It was mostly an army of peasants, and it was not a regular army by any means. So there were a lot of common folk in this army, so-called army, and they passed by many towns in Europe on their way to Anatolia, and then on their way to and then on their way to Anatolia. They didn't make it even to Bilad al-Sham because they weren't properly ready for this kind of thing. And of course, when on their ways, they pillaged many Christian villages, they pillaged many Jewish villages, and they did what they went to do, which was that they looted and stole whatever they found, and they went to when they arrived in Anatolia. At first, like Ustaz said, Qilij Arsalan, the Seljuk Roman Sultan, didn't give much attention to what was happening at this western part of Anatolia, because he was busy with his own with his own Muslim rivals in Anatolia. And when he found them trying to lay siege to Nicaea, he was able to swiftly defeat them through cunning and through strategic, laying in wait and ambushing them at different times. And he made a huge victory. He was a 17-year-old, and this victory was able to defeat him. I know this sentence might sound contradictory, but this I found to be the accurate explanation. Victory had defeated Qilij Arsalan because the second wave, which was a huge regular army that came from Europe to that event, he again underestimated them until they were able to lay siege to Nicaea and to take Nicaea, his own capital. So I always find this fascinating, because during the Sirah, when we read the Sirah discussions, there's the famous battle of Hunayn, where the Muslims would say, "لن نهزم اليوم من قلة." We are now strong enough. We have the numerical superiority in order to achieve victory. And subhanAllah, in the battle of Hunayn, the kuffar and the enemy, they laid in wait and they ambushed the Muslims, And at the first, at the beginning of the battle, the Muslims were running away and they were escaping until the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called upon them and said, "Ana Nabiyyu la kadhib, ana ibn Abd al-Muttalib," and then they rallied back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they achieved victory in this battle. So the point I'm trying to make here is that never ever let victory consume you. Stay humble, stay alert, and don't ever underestimate your enemy, no matter the circumstances. Always be prepared. If our beloved speakers would want to comment on this.
I think that experience, that incident, is particularly important, especially when we look at the current scenario, the current situation with the Zionists, because there's many people, obviously, and have been for the last 2 years, and for very understandable reasons, wanting for the surrounding countries to engage in a military conflict with Israel, without recognizing that this is like a mouse going to war with a tiger's claw, and not understanding that that claw belongs to a tiger, and thinking that if I can defeat that claw, then I've won. Okay, you might be able to win a battle, but that claw is attached to a vicious animal that's much larger than you and that's much stronger than you. And so to be drawn into a military conflict and think that if you can win a battle, you have now won the war, you might end up being in the same situation as Qilaj Arslan, where you win the battle and you bring the war. Because as you rightly said, he was defeated by his victory. So we all understand, or you should understand, again, if you understand the geopolitics, and this is why it's a minefield that they're navigating on how to deal with the current Western occupation of Palestine. Just as important as it was for them to understand properly what they were dealing with at the time of the French occupation of Palestine 1,000 years ago. That you're not just dealing with the people who are right in front of you. You're dealing with all of the people and the forces that are backing them up from abroad. And so it's not actually a battle between between Palestine, between Gaza and Israel. It's the United States and their European backers and so on, their European vassals. And so I think that, alhamdulillah, I believe that the leaders today have understood this, and they have adopted a strategy that actually is cognizant of our history of dealing with the West, and they have understood that, in fact, regional cohesion is necessary, economic cohesion is necessary, and reaching all the way to the West itself, the backers of Zionism, reaching all the way over there to gain influence over those people is how you can actually resolve your situation, rather than the very short-term strategy of engaging in combat with a tiger's claw, without being cognizant of the fact that it's attached to a tiger.
Absolutely, sure, absolutely. Brother Kareem and Brother Huzeifa, I really wish to hear your thoughts on this. If you guys have anything to add, I'd love to listen.
Yeah, hello, but yeah, I think one of the salient points that you brought up there about victory lulling you into a false sense of security is one of the things that, as you've pointed out and our Sheikh pointed out as well, something to be salient, something to be cognizant of. And I think that's where these sort of true calculated planning that we see in these days, because look, one of the things we talk about here at Middle Nation is that we are assured of a victory, and we believe in that. But what do we sort of look at? What are the factors that our leaders as well are looking at, and what do we see them planning for, to not think that if they get over this first hurdle, well, what else is to come? So you can see a lot of planning in that regard. And not to get ahead of ourselves, it sort of delves a bit into chapter 2, but one of the things that is a common theme when we talk about the invasion of the French is this notion of the infighting that we sort of talked about, or just discord within the ranks. And to that end, I know that a lot of people, again, not really understanding realpolitik and how things really matter, and where internal insecurity or lack of alliance internally is problematic, they wanted to be critical of the summit that happened in Doha. But from my perspective, all I could see was how stunning it is that so many different leaders from across these different countries over such a short period of time gathered in one place. aligned at least outwardly towards that common goal. And even then, you could see a little bit of one person from one country maybe saying something a little bit sly or snide. And so you can see that even then, it's sort of a way to tease out how aligned really are we and what are the weak points to work on. Because when you do eventually, if you do confront the enemy and you don't have a united front, those weak links can really cause everything to come undone.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Kareem?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. You know, subhanallah, like, just side note, because when you mentioned this first peasant, crusade kind of, what's interesting, subhanallah, I learned that actually before they even went on this trip, they went to Germany and did the first pogrom. Like they were, let's make this holy. So they went and they killed 2,000 Jews in Germany and raped like 7,000. Yeah, so this was even the start of their trip. Like you can see from the start, it's completely like, really? Is this the Christianity? Subhanallah, completely different. I don't know. It's just like when I'm reading this and listening to it, I just feel obnoxious. I don't know. It's just hard. I don't know. Do you feel this similar? Like that you're just like, I don't know. It's very weird feeling. I don't know how to describe it. But even though it's something that happened like 1,000 years ago, but you still feel as if it's something present. And that's the reason I think that when Ustaz was talking, how kind of similar it is, right? Because you can see exactly the similarity. That's why I feel that's the reason why I'm distressed by it, like, I don't know, does anybody have the similar experience?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, subhanallah. Ustaz, please go ahead. I can't talk when you're going to talk. Please go ahead.
No. It's okay. It's just I was going to say, of course, I agree. I mean, that's why I was saying that we have to understand that history is a continuum, and we're living in that continuum now. It's a continuum of conflict, and if you're familiar with the history, you'll understand who is the initiator of the conflict. It's not us. The West has always been aggressive. It's a continuum of aggression, and it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning with regards to their different definitions of words. Like what Brother Kareem just said, when they were killing Jews in Germany, to them that was making it holy. That's what they meant. We see it as a contradiction because carnage is the opposite of something that would be holy or sacred or purifying. But that's not their understanding. Their understanding of it is that carnage is actually a good thing when it's other people. When you're committing that against other people who you want to oppress, who you want to subjugate, that's the definition of a good thing. It's a holy thing. It's a sacred thing. It's wonderful. To us, it's absolutely appalling. And this is why you have to understand again that this is a continuum, that there has not been a change. And that's why what I said earlier, that in reading this book and you're reading from the chroniclers about what was happening and what the people were subjected to by these Western invaders, by this Franj invasion and Franj occupation. That could have been written yesterday if you just changed some of the names. So you're seeing that these people have not changed in 1,000 years. It's exactly the same playbook that they keep acting upon, century after century after century. And it's extremely important for us to learn the lessons of that, to learn that this is these are their cultural definitions. Their cultural dictionary defines words differently than ours does, and their morality is not a morality that we would recognize as moral. Their morality is what we would recognize as immoral. Their morality is what we would recognize as satanic. And we have to understand that and calibrate our own approach in how we engage with them. And I think, inshallah, that largely our part of the world is learning that lesson and is recalibrating. But there are still those elements that try to that don't understand and that are ignorant of the history and have not studied and recognized the patterns in the behavior of the West, who do call us to the same types of mistakes that our leaders and our countries made in the past.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And just for our listeners and our readers and everyone else, please, I think this should be enough. Brother Kareem's point and Ustad Shahid's explanation should be enough to convince anyone that the Jews made us do it is not an argument to be made. It was not an argument to be made then. It's not an argument to be made now, and it's not going to be an argument that can be made ever. Okay, because it can't possibly be that the Jews made them go to the German villages and this made us do it, or this and that and the other made us do it. It's not something that's it's you can't make that argument in any meaningful way.
Yeah,
it was just remember that, because
it was Epstein's great grandfather who had blackmail on the Pope.
SubhanAllah, yes. Okay, Sister Semira, please. We didn't hear you today, so please.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for the discussion so far. It's great. I just want to add one thing that came to my mind as I was also reading through the chapter, the part where you mentioned the first invasion, where Peter the Hermit led those mostly just normal folks, normal people who were ill-prepared, ill-equipped, and who were emotionally charged by what the Pope and what the religious figures and of their time, of their own religion, were telling them to do, even though it's against their belief, against the Christian religion, to wage, to wage invasions and do all the atrocities that they have done, and yet they just went. They bought the idea and went to the to free in quotes Palestine. So what came to my mind is exactly the things that are happening now in our time. But how people, especially in social media, they use these kinds of religion. In fact, they also use religion about the jihad, that the leaders should open the borders for us to go and declare jihad and all these things, which is really has no basis at all in our religion, and yet it's dominant in the social media. Well, especially initially, now, even now, they still do that and still blame the Arab or the Muslim leaders for the inaction that they claim. However, from this book so far, from what I have read, those leaders at that time as well, it's the way that they were planning their wars, the way that the tactics that they use. I don't know a lot about the army, but the military tactics that they use, how they try to minimize the risk and make sure that none of their troops or the losses are minimal. Those things, it's not considered when you're discussing in the public sphere, especially in the internet. It's just a game. It's just like they are playing the game when you do the war games in PlayStation or whatever. You don't think about those tactics mostly. You're just seeing bombs flying over and villages invaded, but you don't see what's behind the tactics, the planning, all the resources, the food for the troops, and all these things that they have to think of in real life, not in virtual life, in real life. That this is a lot of effort that they are doing, but nobody sees it. And when we are reading it in history books now, even while reading it, you still cannot fathom the amount of pressure, the amount of, like when they were talking about the siege in Antioch, the siege in all these, it was so vivid. Like I really actually felt the extent of the enormous, the amana that the leaders have to ensure that their people are safe and have to go through this trial that came to them. And so I just want to say to everyone, read this book, if also of course other books, but to envision what the leaders go through to ensure the normal leaders, or mostly the leaders of those places that went through where the Crusades came through. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely, Sister Semira. I mean, this is a very important point, you guys, our readers and listeners, because those people who shout out war, And of course, our religion invites us to defend our lands, to be strong in the face of our enemies, and to وأعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة ومن رباط الخيل, to make preparations for war and all of that stuff. But actually, a few points here. One, don't ever think that your Muslim leaders don't know that. They know those verses of the Quran, they know those ayat. So at least give them the benefit of the doubt that they know that. Two, they know more than you do regarding many things. First of all, you don't have the intel that they have. You don't have the intelligence that they have. You don't know how to prepare an army. This is not something to be taken lightly, right? War is an art. There's an art to war. There's the logistical aspect. There's the strategic aspect. There's the weighing of losses on both sides. Most people even don't know that there's something called a pirate victory, for example, which is that you achieved a victory, but you have only 2 soldiers of your army left on the battlefield. So how is that considered a victory? So people just shout out war, but whenever they tell them, for example, that their own children will be participating in that war, they immediately start, and they immediately fall silent. They don't shout as loud. Be please, and this is not some wisdom or anything like that. No, this is real life. Real life means that there are going to be losses, and you need to know if those losses are going to be worth it or not. Otherwise, stop uttering and shouting out war when you don't know actually what you're talking about. So thank you so much for this point, Sister Semira. Okay, so as we were saying, Khalid Arsalan was defeated by his own victory. We have to take into consideration that, subhanAllah, this was a young man. This was a very young man. He was 17 years old. So I'm seeing here Ustad and Brother Kareem and Brother Huzeifa. We're mashallah, we're grown men, and we haven't led an army in our lifetime. So I feel a bit envious of this very young sultan. And if you have read the book, you will see that he ascended the throne when he was 13, and within 4 years he was able to piece back together the realm that he had inherited from his father. So this was an interesting point to read. Also, for those of you who have heard or read or watched about Game of Thrones, I think there's an interesting point to make here, which is that I was one of the first people to have bought the book set of Game of Thrones back then when it was all the hype. But then I read online the reviews and all of that, and I found out that it was very, very graphic, and I tend to think that the author is sick or something, because the graphic scenes in this novel are just way too much, even by the American standards. It was Americans who wrote these reviews, not me. And then I was like, why do we have to turn to that kind of thing when we can see in this Farangi invasion the same dynamics of the Game of Thrones, right? So we don't have 2 big camps. No, we have many camps within the Muslim camp, and we have many camps within the Faranj camp, and we see realpolitik, and we see people trying to preserve their thrones, at the same time trying to free the occupied lands, and how the dynamics of that kind of thing can go, that someone is trying to establish a dynasty and at the same time fighting the Faranj. Others are trying to just keep their thrones and not fighting the Faranj, and just settling for the status quo. So I always find that these Faranj invasions, these 200 years, these 2 centuries, are a real life Game of Thrones without all of that, without all of the unnecessary graphic scenes that are in novels. People to raise. I think we can stop here today. So we stopped at, yes, Ustad.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one quick thing with regard to, for example, the age of Khalid Arslan and being 17 years old. This should make you also pause and reflect on assumptions that you have about governmental systems and systems of succession, and who is appointed a ruler, and who and what that whole process is supposed to be. Because I think that to a certain extent, the psychological colonization is so deep that there are many assumptions that we all operate under that we don't even understand or don't even recognize are Western assumptions, or assumptions that we have taken from the West, about how government is supposed to operate and how government is supposed to be appointed or quote unquote elected and so on. Because look at this boy, 17 years old, and he's a man. He's not a boy. He's 17, and he knows how to run a kingdom. He knows how to run an army. He knows how to formulate strategy. He knows how to conduct diplomacy at 17 years old. Why? Because he's raised in the halls of power. He was brought up on that. That was his bread and butter. All his life was government, was learning, was politics, was learning how to run his society, was learning how to manage his society, learning how to conduct the affairs of the state. He learned that his whole life. And there couldn't be anyone who's more qualified to run a state than someone who's done that their whole life. But you operate under the assumption that so-called democracy is the way it's supposed to be, that you're supposed to have people electing people who have never in their life served in the government, who've never in their life managed the affairs of state, who never in their life have conducted diplomacy, who never in their life have had to run an army, who never in their life have had to strategize about how to deal with threats to your territorial borders and so forth. And you think that that's the best system. And we all operate under this assumption. So many of us operate under this assumption of, for, and by the people. And we have an allergy to any sort of succession ruling system where it's passed down from the father to the son, or anyway from the parent to the child, without considering whether or not that child could end up actually being someone who is the most possibly qualified person to run the state. And we don't even consider that. We just automatically reject and recoil at the idea that it's not a popular election that puts someone into power, without looking at qualifications for being in power. And that, for example, Kilik Arslan, at 17 years old, is a better leader than maybe who the people would have voted for if they had been given a vote. So there are so many things when you look back at our history that should also completely realign your whole framework of thinking, your whole intellectual framework, and cause you to question some of the assumptions that you didn't even know were assumptions. You thought they were just natural facts, but they're actually assumptions. And many times, most times, every time, in fact, if these are assumptions that have been imposed upon us by the West, these assumptions are mistaken.
Absolutely, sir. And whenever they say like, but succession breeds corruption or anything like that, and democracy is not corrupted, so-called democracy, really, then how come you're talking about AIPAC and talking about Epstein? I mean, you guys, you sound so contradictory. Wallahi, it's mind-blowing. Wallahi, it's mind-blowing. Like, succession provides unqualified people, yet your qualified people are all corrupt. They all take bribes and they all are videotaped and all of that. You guys are crazy. Wallahi al-Azim, this is mind-blowing. And the fact that you are able to say it out loud on television and everything, like the congressmen of my country are all under AIPAC. Do you understand what you're saying? You're saying that your country, the executives of your country are all corrupt. They all take bribes and money. And so when you talk about the facade of the Arab rulers, how are you any different, so-called? So please think a bit before you speak.
Well, I mean, also the fact of the matter is that pretty much every society actually operates through a succession of power, even in the West, and that's why they have moved power from the public sector to the private sector, so that can happen, so that you can have a continuity of power and a continuity of management, a continuity of control, because no one actually, with any sense at all, wants the affairs of their state to be managed by a different person every 4 years, some new person every 4 years. No one wants that. That doesn't make any sense. And so they have moved power and control from the public sector to the private sector because, for example, Larry Fink isn't going anywhere. Larry Fink is going to be able to deal with Putin or Xi Jinping or MBS for the next 20, 30, 40 years. You understand? So no one with any sense actually believes that the person that you elect is entrusted with power, because no one who has a lot at stake with regards to who is in power is going to possibly entrust the decision-making process that they will be affected by, that their wealth will be affected by. They will never entrust power to someone who just gets elected by the rank and file people in that country, who are not particularly educated about matters of state. So, in fact, the systems that you condemn because of their succession, the nature of their succession, you're living under one anyway. But the difference is that the one that you're living under is hidden. The one that we live under is out in the open, which makes it by definition less corruptible than the one that you're living under.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So I think the last point that we can raise before, inshallah, closing up, is that there is a difference in warfare style that has been noted by the author, and I think it's worth mentioning, between the Turks, which are steppe empire people. So they are horseback riders. They are people who shoot arrows, and they have this feigned retreat, hit and run tactics, as opposed to the French invaders who had, he called them in the book human forts or human castles. So the cavalry, for example, of the French, they would be wearing armor from head to toe, and even their mounts would be wearing armor. And so they would be essentially medieval tanks, which made it all the more difficult for Khalid Arsalan, when facing the regular army the second time around, to defeat them in open battle, because it was the first time he saw anything like that. Cavalry was simply unable to match it. His own cavalry, I mean, and arrows were simply not enough, because they would be usually deflected off the armor. Later on, during the conflict, during the French invasions, the Muslims would gain more experience regarding that kind of difference in war style, and they would come up with ways to mitigate that and to engage with that new enemy. So I think it was an important point to make, that this difference in war style was one of the main reasons even the First Crusade worked at all. And just bear in mind, our listeners and readers, we had like 8 invasions, 8 so-called crusades, right? Only the first one was successful. Only the first one was able to establish the kingdom of Jerusalem and the 3 counties of Tripoli, Antioch, and Edessa in the Muslim lands. All of the rest were unsuccessful. Okay, so it took just a small disunity of Muslim leaders at a certain time in history for this kind of thing to happen. But subhanAllah, 50 years later, half a century later, when momentum was being gained on the Muslim side, and things started to change. My beloved speakers, if you have anything to add before we close up, inshallah, I'd be more than happy to listen.
I think one thing that I would add in is sort of to circle back to Brother Kareem's point earlier about the heaviness of what we were reading, especially in these first couple of chapters. What gave me hope, and perhaps we can apply this to our current situation as well, is just, at least historically, we know, I think this account ends towards with Salahuddin Ayyubi and Nuruddin. And so there's some sort of hopefulness there of, look, this is going towards something good, while what we see and what you hear is, it doesn't really make it less difficult to read about and to contemplate. That surety of what's coming gives a level of peace of mind. And in many ways, when you look around at what's happening these days, well, I think that's something that gives me some peace of mind as well. So that's just one thing I wanted to, when Brother Kareem was saying that, is it doesn't really mitigate or lessen the severity of what you see. The tragedies are real. The pains are very real. But as Muslims, the ultimate victory, not just the one in this dunya, but the one in the akhirah, is the one that really gives a lot of hope and comfort to the heart.
Absolutely. We have to bear this in mind. We are Muslims, and like Ustad said many times, we read the situation here in our Muslim lands with our eye on the future, and how we know things are going to unfold, which is that eventual supremacy is going to be for the Muslims. And because it's mentioned in the Quran, right? We're not making this up. It's mentioned in the Quran that eventually we will have the upper hand, inshallah. So all our analysis, all of our assumptions, all of our planning, all of our understanding of the situation around us is based on that fact. Brother Kareem, please.
Yeah, I'll just be maybe a bit repeating what has been said, but like, this makes you really understand that they have been the same the whole time, right? Like, they do not change, and by reading this, you just see the similarities with current times, right? Very interesting point that Ustaz Shahid was mentioning in the last video regarding these, what are you defending, right? What are you defending? And just like when you read about these French invasions, you really think the same, like, what are you defending, And just because the time when they went on these crusades and how they behaved, it was a time where they lost kind of the power, right? Roman Empire was in decay, everything was kind of not really looking good, right? So they didn't care about the image. Like before, right, when we look at it from the Roman Empire and so on, they behaved like animals, of course, I'm not saying they didn't, but still you had some at least image that you were trying to preserve, right? But you can see that when the times got a bit tougher, they didn't care how they were perceived. They didn't care about the action. They didn't care, like, yeah, turn the other cheek, right? Or, really? Like, is this the behavior? And you can see that everything that they speak about is completely contradictory to the actions that they perform later on. And it's been the same 1,000 years ago and it's the same now, right? And, Allah will not change نعمة, right? أنعم على قوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. So if the people won't change, nothing will change. They will remain the same, right? And you cannot see any effort from these people of changing, of wanting to be good people, good people in our understanding of the word good. So yeah, I think really this is something that one needs to bear in mind, that when you read history, don't assume it's like a fairy tale that, happened 1,000 years ago and everything is different now. It is the same. And we as Muslims are the same, and at the time we can, complain about them not being united, about them being whatever, is your family united? Like, it's very easy to look back and condemn and, not be able, I'm not saying I can defend every step that they have made, but in light of, the human experience, we can understand that we are not perfect and mistakes have been made. But still, our basis is the correct basis. Their basis is the wrong basis, right? And you can see it explicitly in reading about these French invasions, what the approach was. How did they behave when they defeated each other? Like, look what the French did when they tried to lay siege or tried to, and look what the Muslims did when they defeated them, right? Look at the differences in the approach and look at the difference in the mindset, and it's completely opposite, right? And it can be seen, as I said, 1,000 years ago, and please reflect onto the same, dynamic today, right?
Absolutely, Brother Kareem, and very great points raised, mashallah. And I think we can, and sum what you said up in one word, which is that, Rome was not christened, right? Christianity was Romanized, and Latindom was not christened, but Christianity was Latinized. So they took Christianity and they molded it into something to allow them to do whatever they wanted to do in the first place. So Alhamdulillah that we have Islam, and Alhamdulillah that we have our scholars and our current rulers. And with that, my dear speakers and my dear listeners, we are closing up today. Hopefully we will be able to take this discussion every Saturday or every other Saturday as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits and as our time permits, because we want to provide a space where everyone can benefit, inshallah, and everyone can raise their points. And we will be talking about, inshallah, chapter 2, the remaining of chapter 1 and chapter 2, the siege of Antioch, and the situation within which the siege took place, because I think it's very important, it's relevant. And with that, I ask you to all pray for us and to wait for us, inshallah, in the next session. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام
Barakallah
ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير brother.
Salam.
Thank you all. وإياكم جميعا.